Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer Dave Matter. Dave, the Missouri football season ends in College Station with a 59-29 defeat. Never a competitive game. Missouri really did not appear super interested in being there. They were down 42-0 in the second quarter, and that was basically it. Then after that, a sort of interesting weekend ensued where rampant rumors that Gary Pinkel was going to resign or be fired, which were completely unfounded. Gary Pinkel then having a press conference on Tuesday and sort of basically saying he's definitely not resigning. He's basically keeping the staff. Everything's going to be kind of status quo. So, assuming we're going now into next year, with kind of the same setup as this year. Just your thoughts, was this year a fluke, or is this maybe a sign of a downward trend for the Missouri program?
Well, I think you have to look at the injuries and say that did factor
There were injuries
in.
this year?
There were a few, I heard. More than in our lifetime is what I've heard. So there were a few.
I'm glad we stopped discussing those after the Alabama game.
Yes, I'm glad we did. Is it okay if we talk about them now?
We can.
Okay. No, there were some injuries. I think you have to point to those. I think some of the injuries on the offensive line might have helped contribute to some of the injuries at the quarterback position with James Franklin. But I think the injuries also might have exposed some other problems that need to be addressed, and just the depth on this team and what they have, not only on the offensive line, but at quarterback. So I think with one problem, you find another. And I think Gary Pinkel has talked a lot in the last this week about fixing problems and going to work and working hard to fix them, and those are all sound like good things. But what he hasn't really said is what problems need fixing. I mean, there's some that are obvious to us, but a lot of it just comes down to, I think, personnel. Are they talented enough? Do they have the right players to compete in this league, compete in any league at this point? Because they weren't very competitive in some of their games this year, especially Saturday's loss at A&M. So you've mentioned this a lot, and I think it's a valid point. You have to look at some of the last couple of recruiting classes, not this past year that was pretty good, but especially the 2011 class. If you look at that class right now, there's only 2 players on there that are probably opening spring practice as starters. Brad McNulty, the center, and Kentrell Brothers, a linebacker who's a backup, played a lot the other night when Will Ebner got hurt. That's about it. Otherwise, it's a bunch of guys that are way down on the depth chart, and who knows if they're going to develop into starters. So,
it wasn't like they had a lot of surprising busts either.
Right,
That was when they showed up. It was like it was Sheldon Richardson, and who are these guys?
Right. So it's, I think it's just a matter of the talent that they have. Is it enough to?
And that was coming off a pretty good season.
It was, yeah. So I think some of the problems might have already happened. You can't really fix them.
Okay, well, I guess the one thing you can say about college football, though, is you're always about one dynamic quarterback from being good. Look at what A&M was last year. Manziel becomes their quarterback. They also had major changes, obviously, but personnel-wise, he was sort of the X factor. He comes in, and they're a 10-win team in the SEC. So it's never that far away. The question is, do you have that guy on your roster now, or is he coming in the near future? And so we don't really know that. I don't know that there's no one like him, but, do you have that kind of quarterback? So that's part of it. And then I just think that probably what they did in 2007 or 2008, I don't know that they're going to duplicate that. That was probably 2007 was the Pinkel high water mark. A good year now, I think you're talking about probably 8-4, whereas a good year before, like a 2010 season, was a 10-win season in the SEC. Now, with that said, this season, I think they would have done just as bad in the Big 12 as they did in the SEC. They're actually, defensively at least, were better suited to play running teams. They have a terrible pass defense, and they would have saw a whole lot more of that in the Big 12 than in the SEC. So I would sort of maybe discourage the idea that, they moved the SEC and this is why all these problems happen. I think those problems probably would have happened regardless.
Yeah, and as much as Pinkel wanted to make this season out to be sort of an aberration, you look at the last 2 years, they're just 11-12 against FBS teams these last 2 seasons, and that's just not good enough. And as much as they got credit in 2011 for kind of coming out of a bad start and finishing strong, they weren't beating good teams. Since beating Oklahoma here in Columbia in 2010, the big upset on homecoming, they've beaten just 2 ranked opponents. So, that's the thing that people point to as the downward trend, that they just haven't been good enough. And this year against ranked opponents, except for almost beating Florida, they weren't even close in some of those games. Alabama, South Carolina, fell flat at the end against Georgia. Those are all elite teams, but still, you're going to be facing them every year in this conference, or at least teams that are about that good.
As you touched on with the depth, I think when you lose your quarterback, your starting quarterback, you're not going to have a great season probably.
Right.
But you see a lot of teams lose their quarterback and they still have competencies. Oklahoma State, they just keep plugging along with whoever they stick in there. Right. I mean, it's pretty common to lose your quarterback, especially if you play like Missouri does, where you're going to run him all the time. So I think, it's too bad that happened, but again, you can't just say, whoops, we're canceling the season and our quarterback got hurt. I mean, you have to have some depth, and I think that's where not only did they maybe not recruit the right quarterbacks, maybe they had some bad luck maybe, but I think they also didn't develop the quarterbacks they did have, because a lot of guys that starting with the guy who would have been, I guess, a senior, like the Blaine Dalton group, you lost Tyler Gabbert, Ashton Glazer. There's a lot of guys you brought in that just didn't pan out and left, and so when James Franklin does get hurt, you have to turn to a guy that wasn't really ready.
Yeah, and Gary Pinkel in his press conference this week talked about how he expected James Franklin to have a great season this year based off last year. But did he not remember that he had shoulder surgery in March? I mean, I think the staff, if you gave him another chance, would maybe have prepared the backups a little bit more, given them more work in preseason camp, thinking that maybe Franklin couldn't make it through the year with that shoulder injury. And sure enough, in the second game of the season, even though they say it's a different part of the shoulder, he had the other injury that just kind of set him back for the rest of the year until late when he had a couple more injuries.
And he got hurt on a passing play, but they also ran him to death. And I think that if they learn nothing else this year, it's that this idea that you can go empty backfield and use the quarterback as the primary ball carrier, I think, is out the door.
Especially when he's your quarterback.
Right. Okay, we'll tune in tomorrow, and we will discuss maybe some ideas we have for changes to the Tigers.